Okay.
I was curious. You have been a producer and screenwriter of X-Men franchise. But this time you direct this movie.
Yeah.
So why? And which task, being a producer and director, which task is more daunting?
Well, like you say, I've been a writer-producer of these movies for a long time, and produced, obviously, and written other movies as well outside the X-Men universe.
Yeah.
But I always wanted to direct. I mean, it's something that I went to film school to be a writer and a director, and obviously was lucky enough to find success as a writer, and that became my career path for a long time. And then that transitioned into producing, and I was spending all my time on set and sort of realizing, well, I'm kind of doing a lot of the director's work. So at a certain point, I felt like I was ready to be a director of any movie, and even a big, large-scale movie like this. But I didn't want to do it until I felt like it was a story that I had an incredible passion for, and that I was uniquely suited to tell. And the Dark Phoenix story was my favorite of all of the X-Men storylines, growing up reading them. And so when we knew Bryan Singer wasn't going to direct the next X-Men movie after Apocalypse, and I had a sense that it was going to be Dark Phoenix, I just couldn't imagine writing it and handing it to another director, and so that's why this time. And directing is by far and away the most daunting or difficult of jobs, because unlike when you're a producer on set or a writer on set, and you can like take breaks, you can check your phone, when people are moving the lights, you can go take a phone call, you can meditate, you can do whatever you want to do. When you're a director, the second you call cut, you're moving on to the next shot, there's 10 people waiting in line that are asking you questions. And so it's just nonstop all day long from the second you get there till the end of the day. I literally would just lock my phone away once I showed up at work in the morning, and check it on the car ride home at the end of the day. So it's relentless in terms of just the intensity of work, which is very different than producing and writing, and the hardest part about writing, which is unique to the other producing and directing, is you have a lot of solitary time. And that can be lonely, and that can be difficult because you kind of can beat yourself up as a writer on the tough days.
Yeah. So you enjoy the director?
Loved it. Yeah, I love it. Love it.
Okay. The next question is, I think the tone of X-Men is so serious, a little bit scary. I remember in the beginning of the X-Men Apocalypse, in ancient Egypt, the villain come back to life. So that was scary at that moment.
Yeah.
It's like a horror movie, but very cool. So how did the tone of the X-Men movie establish in the first place?
Well, I mean, obviously Bryan Singer established the tone of the X-Men movies back with X-Men 1, and he did it in the very first scene. He started the franchise in the Holocaust, in Auschwitz, and so there's very little that's more serious than that. And I think what he established from that film was that he was going to treat comic books the same way we treat any literature, with a seriousness of purpose, with a complexity of characterization, and that we've kind of been following that ever since. I would say that the tone of this movie is slightly different, and the look of this movie, the aesthetic, is definitely different than what Bryan did in the past. I think in some ways, other than Matthew Vaughn's First Class, we really have been sticking to Bryan's look, and that's a 20-year-old aesthetic. It's been 20 years since he made the first film, and I felt like it was time to sort of freshen up the feel, the look, the tone of the movie. And I felt like this particular story needed a different kind of vibe, look. I wanted it to be more raw. I wanted it to feel more real and gritty. And in the previous X-Men movies, there was a smoothness to them. There was a sort of formality to them. Everything was a little bit larger than life, and sort of glossy. And I wanted this to be dirty, and I wanted it to feel messy and human. And so what I did is, instead of on those movies, I think we had like 2 shots ever that were handheld shots, that are kind of shaky, and you feel that the person holding the camera. On this film, I think there's 2 shots that aren't handheld shots. It's pretty much all handheld. It has a more like intense, immediate, immersive feel to it, and that was really something that was important to me, and is something that's very different than the tone that we've done in these movies.
Okay, I can't wait to see this movie.
Thanks.
So, have you considered adding more humor elements in X-Men movies, maybe in the future, and because just like Marvel?
Yeah, I mean, we're very different than Marvel. I think the thing that makes the X-Men so beloved, both in the comics and in the cartoons and in the movies, is that they take their problems seriously, and also they're characters who struggle. They're outcasts, they're outsiders, they're persecuted, they're oppressed. There is humor in these movies, obviously, but the humor is always humor that comes from character, It's not humor just for the sake of humor. They're not cracking jokes. And so, I think that this is just a franchise like the Dark Knight movies that tend to be a little darker because the subject matter is.
Yeah. Okay. You are also the producer of Deadpool.
Yeah.
And Logan.
Yes.
This two movies fascinating. And I think that the genre of this two movies is very different.
Yes.
So will you make the movie like a standalone like this in the future?
I think I don't know what the future holds for the X-Men universe. I was really so focused because this was my directorial debut. I was so focused on this film that I wasn't thinking movies ahead for the first time in a long time. Previously as the writer-producer, I was always thinking about the sort of architecture of the larger universe. And this one, I was really just trying to stay focused as possible on one movie. But yeah, Deadpool's such a different tone. Logan is was such a wildly different. Logan was a Western. Deadpool was a zany comedy. I mean, I think the thing that we've tried to do with all of these X-Men, I've tried to do with all of these X-Men movies and all of the standalones, is give them a feeling of being a different genre. So each time you feel like you're getting something fresh and new. Like, Logan's a Western. Deadpool's a zany comedy. First Class to me was actually kind of a spy movie. Days of Future Past was a time travel movie, so it had that sort of science fiction time travel element to it. Apocalypse was a disaster movie, like a Roland Emmerich, end of the Earth disaster movie. And this movie to me is a psychological thriller. Obviously a supernatural, fantastical science fiction psychological thriller, but really a psychological, intense thriller. And so, each of these films we try to do something fresh and different, so the audience doesn't feel like we're repeating ourselves.
The next question, I want to know, there are so many appealing plots and so many stories in X-Men comics. So why you choose the Dark Phoenix on the big screen?
Well, the Dark Phoenix story is the most beloved, the most enduring, the most iconic of all X-Men storylines. And when I was a kid growing up reading X-Men comics, it was my favorite one. It was the one that was like, I remember reading it, I was in 5th grade, and I remember reading it and being like, I don't know, I don't even know how to handle the world anymore. It changed the way I looked at the world because it was a good person doing bad things. And previously in comics, I was like, there are good guys, there are bad guys, heroes and villains. And suddenly there was this story where the hero was doing villainous things. And it shook me to my core when I read it. And I never sort of forgot it. And so to me, the opportunity to tell this story on a big screen for a broad audience was so compelling, even though there's so many other great storylines in the X-Men over the years. This was the one that I was like, if we have a chance to tell it and tell it right, or we're being true to the essence of what Chris Claremont created in the original comic, it was too much to pass up.
You like the Sophie Turner? She's very popular in China. Why you choose her to join X-Men team?
Well, I remember her audition. She had to audition to get the role. Yeah, and I wrote this monologue that was never going to be in the movie, but it was just to sort of test her acting ability. And the monologue was a story about her struggle with her powers. And what I saw in Sophie was the strength that we knew she had from seeing her on Game of Thrones. And Jean is the most powerful mutant in all of the X-Men universe, and so I needed that kind of power and strength from her. But what I also saw was the vulnerability and the fragility and the humanity that the character has to have too. And in this movie especially, you see both sides. You see her as the most powerful creature in the entire galaxy, who is unable to control that power. And that struggle inside of her, that internal struggle, where she's really the hero and villain of the movie in many ways, that's what I saw in Sophie in that audition, the first time I ever saw her as Jean.
So the Mystic, Jennifer Lawrence, is also popular in China.
Right.
Will you make a standalone movie about this character?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if Jennifer could handle an entire movie where she has to be blue for that much. She doesn't like having to put the paint on. But I don't know. We really approached this movie like it was the completion of a saga that we started, certainly with the X-Men First Class cast. And so we weren't thinking about future movies. we were thinking about like how do we actually complete this in a way that's going to be satisfying and fulfilling to, if you've seen one X-Men movie, you've seen all of them, to the X-Men fans out there, who've become like a little part of this X-Men family. These movies are really at their core movies about family. The X-Men are this kind of dysfunctional family that have come together. And so we saw this as the end of something, and we certainly weren't thinking about spin-offs from the individual characters.
Okay. The Jessica Chastain, you play a villain in
Yeah.
this movie. In China, Chastain just like a very good person.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's funny. Well, Jessica in real life is a very good person, so that makes sense. And I think what she brings to this part is a little bit of that goodness, meaning like she's not pure evil. She's actually trying to empower Jean in many ways in this movie, and I think that's something that's, like all the characters in the film, I try to create a complexity to her, and that's what she brought to it.
Yeah. So is she the Landra or the mastermind?
She's kind of like a combination of a lot of those characters. What I wanted to do was really focus this movie on Jean and her struggle and make it as emotionally true and honest and raw and real and inside that struggle as possible. And I didn't want too many other storylines that were going to compete because I had roughly 2 hours to tell this massive saga. And so for Jessica's character, what I did is I sort of used inspiration from Lilandra, from Mastermind, from Emma Frost, from other characters to bring in, to sort of create this character and bring it to life.
Okay. So the next question is James McAvoy.
Yeah.
And Michael Fassbender.
Yeah.
There are the spirits of the X-Men movies. So how do you work together?
Sure.
And what's the feeling to work with these two talented actors?
Yeah, they're extraordinary. I mean, I remember when I saw, again, going back to an audition, I remember I saw Michael Fassbender also had to audition for the role. And I remember I saw his screen test where he acted across James, because James already had the role of Charles. And Michael came, and just immediately you could see they had this chemistry, they had this sort of, there was like, felt like there was history between these two people, even though they barely knew each other. And they're two of the greatest actors alive. So seeing them together was extraordinary. Working with them is great fun because they're very serious, obviously, about their jobs, and when they start acting and the cameras are rolling, they're as focused as anyone I've ever seen. But they're fun. They're guys who love life, and we've become close friends off camera and even in between movies. And they're very great. Like, I'm a very collaborative person, and so I actually, especially when I'm working with really talented people, I want to get the most I can get out of them. And so I love getting input from the actors, and James and Michael especially, because they've lived with these characters for so long and they've gone through such a sort of twisty, turny journey with these characters. I love like bringing them into the writing process and bringing them even into the directing process so that we can create, and discover really new moments, new sort of colors for them to play.
Okay. The next question is that because the series of movies need to be deeply bound with actors, so whether the actors are willing to extend their contract,
Right.
maybe seem very important.
Sure.
So, be a producer, what do you think about the contract, the actor's contract?
Well, on franchise movies like this, you will not just get the actor, for the one movie. The contract involves options for subsequent movies, for later movies, and usually it's 3 movies, and in some cases, I know Marvel does 7 movies. We usually do 3 movies, and for the X-Men First Class cast, the 3 movies was up after Apocalypse, and so we needed to do a new deal with those 4 actors: Nicholas Hoult, James McAvoy, Fassbender, and Jen Lawrence. And we did new deals with them that were good deals for them and for the studio too. And one of the things that was lovely about this film is because we've all become this little family, and I've been working with them for 10 years now, and we're all friends. They were really supportive of my making the transition to directing. In some ways, they were responsible for it. It was all of them that came up to me at the end of Apocalypse and said they really wanted me to direct the next movie. And Jen especially said that she wouldn't do the next movie unless I directed it. And so I reminded her and them of that when it came time to negotiate their contracts.
Okay. I have one important question here. You work with the DP of Avatar.
Yeah.
The Mario.
Marfiori. Yeah.
How did there is something new breakthrough on filming process?
You know, Morrow, having worked on Avatar, there's no technical thing he doesn't know. And I think the thing that we did differently in this movie that we haven't done in other X movies, there's lots of different visual effects in this movie, but that's not really the cinematographer's job. One of the things he really wanted to do was create these huge LED light displays. And so what we'd have these massive panels on set, massive, like the size of a side of a building. And they'd be all around the actors in sequences that were going to be visual effects driven sequences. And what those panels would do is they would create interactive light on the actors. So even though what's around them is not cosmic storm or something supernatural, you're getting some flicker real light playing on their faces. So there's a three-dimensionality to the experience of seeing it once it's layered in with the visual effects. There's already something organic on them. So it's not all fake on their faces, and that was something that I've actually never seen done before in a film, and it's very expensive, but it was very important to Morrow, and I think it lent to the realism of the movie.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Oh, sure, thank you. That was fun. It's a good conversation.